code that actually creates this piece of data. But you don't need to explicitly call it. It kind of serializes the data, and serializing, it's not the same though, but what serializing does is it takes a piece of data and allows you to convert it to a string format that you can save to a file or a database. Session encode does something similar, but the format is different than actually calling serialize on a piece of data. So I'll go back one page. And in video.php, there's a session underscore start, and in this situation, the session was already started a couple of pages ago, and it was going to resume the session, and I can do a var underscore dump, which is a variable dump on the session superglobal. And what will happen is it will resume the session, read in this file, read in the data on that file, which sits on my Windows temp directory, because it's using that session ID as the identifier to get the correct file. And it'll do a session underscore decode on it to populate or fill in the session variable with the data that it's supposed to have. So I'll save video.php and refresh the page, and I'll do a view source on it. So a session contains an array with a key form data and the form information that I entered. So the session is aware that that information exists. Let me comment out this alert real quick. Another interesting thing is if I open up a new tab and go to the same page, it still retains the session information, because you can see that the form data is still there. And if I open up another tab, that form data is also there. Let me open up a new web browser window, completely different from this one. And if I go to that page, it still remembers me. Now, if I open up a completely different web browser, this is Firefox, let me open up Chrome. In here, it shows an array with no information in it. And if I look out and see Windows temp, it's actually created a new session file because it thinks that this is a new person accessing the website. So it generates a new session ID, and there's no information inside of it. And from the Firefox perspective, what I would have to do is one way to get it to generate a new session is just to close out all my web browser windows, open up a new one, and it's lost the data. And if I look out and see Windows temp again, it's created a third session file. Now, to get rid of this session file, and this is useful like if you have like a log out button. So if you want to log out of the website and destroy the session completely, I can call a function session destroy. So if I refresh this again, we should see this file go away. So that's how to get rid of a session. But the actual session cookie is still on their web browser. And if I want to regenerate if I want to create a new session ID, what I can do is call session underscore regenerate ID, and it accepts a parameter to delete the old session file, which is not needed in this case, but I'll give it an argument of true. So when I refresh this web page, we should see a third session file appear. And it's created a new session and a new session file to go along with it. And the cookies will go away if you close out the web browser window. By default, it doesn't. They expire when you close out the window. All the windows, I should say. You can force them to expire, like if you click on the logout button, by explicitly doing a set cookie on it as well, but I won't go over doing that. Another interesting thing that about these things is that I'm running a extension for Firefox called Firebug, and if I do a view on Firebug, it shows me there's a cookies tab in here that you can enable, and I already have it enabled, but it shows me the PHP session ID cookie, its value, and there's these two fields to the right of it, this HTTP only and the security fields. Now, just independent of just doing web programming, there's like this other facet that I'm not really privy to most of the time because I don't really think about it, but there's another group of people, and what they do is they run security audits on websites, and they come up with things that can be improved, and they're trying to think of like the bad guys trying to get into websites. And one of the, well, actually two of the things that they'll point out are these two fields over here called HTTP only and this security, and these are two additional cookie attributes that you can set on these cookies. It's like one concern that they bring up is that they could somehow, and I don't know how they do this, and these are the bad guys, that they can inject JavaScript code on a web page and try to get this ID. And this is someone else's session ID, and they can try to get information out of it, or they can become them and reset their password. And hopefully when I program these pages, I don't ask them for their current password because they're logged in. That's probably one way around it, but they can probably get at more information. And so that they advise setting this HTTP only attribute. But it's like doing web programming, I'm just not really focused on it because I just want to get stuff done and move on to the next thing. But now to actually set that globally across the board, in php.ini, there's a section in here called session. And there is an entry called session.cookie_HTTP only. And if I set that to true, or the value of 1, save the file, and restart my Apache web server, when I refresh my web browser, when I try to do on the onload handler, when I try to do an alert on document.cookie, it says that there's nothing there, and that's because this PHP session ID is the only cookie being set, but that cookie has this HTTP only property set, and what that does is it restricts access to that cookie to the web server. So client-side JavaScript or VB script or whatever client-side web code that there is that you can run in the web browser, they no longer have access to try to get at this. Now, let's say, for example, you don't want to set cookies HTTP only across the board. You just want to set this one in particular. Going back to PHP I'll just delete the 1. and restart the web server again. And the session is back. So I'll just explicitly make the PHP session ID cookie HTTP only. But if I want to set other cookies, JavaScript can still get to them. So in video.php, below session_start, I'll remove this regenerate ID. I can do a set cookie. And this will actually set a cookie on their web browser, but what I'll do is just reset the, well actually I'll do another set on the PHP session ID with the HTTP only attribute set. So I need to specify the name of the session ID, which is PHP sesh ID, and you can get that with session_name. You need the value of the session ID, which you can get with session_ID. You can give an expiry time, and I'll put down 0. A path, and I'll put in a /, which will make it the cookie accessible throughout the entire website path, and well, actually make it accessible from the document root to all of its subdirectories. I'll leave the domain blank. I find if I set it to the actual domain, it creates a second cookie that's different from the first. The next attribute is the secure attribute, which I'll set to false. And lastly is the HTTP only attribute that I'll set to true. So I'll save it, reload the web page, and the HTTP only attribute is set on that cookie, so JavaScript can no longer get to it, but it doesn't apply to all cookies, it just applies to this PHP session ID. The security attribute, when that is set, what happens is that the cookie is only accessible over HTTPS, and that's the encrypted version of HTTP communication. It's called HTTP secure. So the communication between the client's web browser and the web server and the traffic that goes in between them is encrypted, and when the security attribute is set, the cookie is only accessible when you're using when the connection is encrypted. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching.